With- On behalf of Institute of Regional Studies, I, Amna Nisar Abbasi, and our team warmly welcome our distinguished speakers, Lieutenant General retired ABDUL QAYYUM, Professor FARID MIRBAGHERI, Professor Syed Kandil Abbas, and all the participants into our webinar series on JCPOA and International Multilateral Diplomacy, Part 2. Today's webinar is basically a continuation of discussion held on 7th of April 2021 on currently active agenda in the region, that is JCPOA, in which all the speakers urged that the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is imminent to be executed to de-escalate any anticipated nuclear venture by Iran. The recent conflict between Hamas and Israel in the region, which is tackled maturely by the international community, also opened a new case in the same square. At the same time, all eyes are focused on the upcoming Iranian presidential election, which will shape up the issue in the region upon the outcome. Today's focus is to ascertain the future of JCPOA and multilateral diplomacy in the scenario of recent developments in the region and the forthcoming election of new Iranian president. This webinar also discovers the options available to Iran in case of JCPOA's failure. Now, I request Mr. Imran Sardar for the opening remarks. Gold medalist Mr. Imran Sardar is a senior research analyst at the Institute of Regional Studies. He published more than a dozen research papers on conflict transformation, India-Pakistan relation, and the human security issue from South Asian perspective. He has authored a book on conflict transformation between India and Pakistan. He regularly contributes in national and international newspapers. With this, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna, for the kind introduction. And thank you, General Saab and Dr. Qandil Abbas and Dr. Farid, especially Dr. Abbas and General Saab, once again taking part in this second session on the JCPO. And I welcome Farid for being in the panelist. In the last session, we had a candid discussion on the prospects of the revival of the JCPO. There was an agreement, as Amna Nisar just said, that the role of the JCPO is crucial in breaking the deadlock between the United States and Iran. Well, I would like to briefly apprise the audience about the important developments taken place since the IRA's last session a month ago. So far, 4 rounds of talks in Vienna have been completed, and the 5th one is underway. The overall, the negotiation remained relatively positive as of today. In the last 4 rounds, it appeared that a lot of work has been done on sequencing in these sanctions, and in the 5th round, which is said to be the last and final round, and the work is underway on nuclear compliance from Iran. There is another important development took place between Iran and the IAEA. That is the extension of technical agreement, which now will expire on 24th June. So what does the extension of IAEA mean for the JCPO? Simply, I think it has a positive impact. It has provided an opportunity to European Union and the allied partners to continue with their efforts to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. This agreement allows the IAEA to continue inspection at Iranian nuclear site, but Iran, however, will keep the tapes, the recording, until the deal is revived in its original form and the United States sanctions are lifted. With this development, I think the negotiations are entering into the very crucial stage. And the ball is now, I think, in West and world powers court, as Iran has played its card by allowing the inspection, IAEA inspections. But if we look at the from the bilateral angle, there are mixed vibes. Both Iran and the US are still trading how to restore the deal. And after the 4 rounds of talks, the United States says that it is still unclear whether Iran is ready and willing to take the necessary steps to return to the compliance. Iran, on its part, reiterating that the lifting the sanction is a legal and moral obligation. for the United States, not negotiating leverage. Having said, the US and Iran have a strong interest in the negotiation process continuing along with the EU. And I think there can be a little delay until the elections are over in the Iran. On June 18, Iran has its presidential election in which 7 candidates are fighting for the presidency. The change of command will obviously add something into the nuclear deals, but I agree what Raza Tashkir in the last session said, that the change of leadership will have a little impact on the negotiations as it has the blessings of its supreme leader. Apart from the IAEA, US sanction and the EU efforts, some other factors may have an impact on the success of the JCPOA, such as the Israel stance on the negotiations and the recent situation in the Middle East, particularly the Israel-Palestinian tensions. So I think there is a dire need to keep the spoiling factors at bay while the negotiations are underway. And I think the EU is doing a good job. And I hope today's discussion will not only enhance our understanding of this very important subject, but also enlighten us about the prospects of the JCPOA, as we are having a panel of eminent scholars with us. With this, I thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable remarks. To discuss the important and multidimensional topic, we have 3 eminent speakers with us today. Our first speaker is Lieutenant General retired ABDUL QAYYUM. I think there is a problem with their audio, so I will move to our second speaker. Our second speaker is from Cyprus, Dr. MIRBAGHERI. FARID MIRBAGHERI is Professor of International Relations and holds the Dialogue Chair in Middle Eastern Studies at University of Nicosia. He studied in the UK and received his PhD in International Relations from Cave University, England. From 1997 to 2007, he was Director of Research at the Center for World Dialogue, based in Nicosia. He served as the editor of the Cyprus Review in 1998 to 2005 and the associate editor of Global Dialogue in 1996 to 2008. His writings include International Peacemaking in Cyprus, published by Hearst & Co. and Routledge in 1998, the 2010 edition of the Historical Dictionary of Cyprus, and the new edition of the same co-authored by him for fall 2021. His book on War and Peace in Islam, A Critique of Islamist Political Discourses, came out by Pelgrave in 2012. His research interests include theory of international relations and mysticism, United Nations, Cyprus, and dialogue of civilizations. Currently, he is completing a monograph on critical thought in non-Western approaches to international relations, which is due in 2021-2022. With this, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Very topical issue. At the outset, allow me to say, since I'm originally Iranian, what I say should not be taken as either for or against the government or the regime in Iran. I will try to be just an impartial observer as much as I can. Having said that, I'd like to point out 2 things before getting into the core of the issues. That a foreign policy in Iran is not something that is formulated by the foreign ministry or necessarily the government. We had this openly announced, declared by the supreme leader himself only a few weeks ago, a month ago, that the foreign ministry only executes decision made by higher organs. Well, he did not specify what those higher organs were, but it is known that all come under his command, and he is ultimately the decision maker. So that should be very borne in mind now, whether there's a change of government now, and that would per se mean a change. It may be that because those higher organs want to change elements in foreign policy, they may prefer a certain type of government to another, but the governments per se do not have much impact on formulation of foreign policy. The other point I want to mention is that Iran's supreme leaders have, since the revolution, shown to be flexible and to change track if that is in the interest of the Islamic Republic. As the founder of the revolution, Ayatollah Khomeini said, he said that preservation of the system and of the regime, it comes before and above all else. And that's why in the 8th year of the war with Iraq, he accepted the ceasefire, which he was adamantly against. And he had said he would never accept unless Saddam had been toppled. But he accepted it, and he called it more bitter than poison. But he changed track nevertheless. We had the same with Ayatollah Khamenei now, about that he would never accept curtailing Iranian nuclear program, but eventually what he called heroic flexibility, he actually did accept that. So we have to bear those two important points in mind. Now, getting straight to the core issue, what if the agreements, the JCPOA, is rejected? It doesn't work. It somehow is not revived. What will happen is that Iran's economy will, in all likelihood, move closer to complete bankruptcy. I mean, they are already printing money to pay wages and salaries of civil servants. They're desperately short of money. Inflation is rampant, there is unemployment. So all this will get worse. As a result of that, social unrest and political dissent will spread. We're already seeing it every day across the country. Those retired, those even working in the oil industry and others, they are demonstrating, some of them threatening to go on strike. This may lead to some kind of implosion from within. And if that happens and the order would appear to be under threat, then we could possibly expect a military takeover, and that would have to be by IRGC in order to keep the order and not allow a complete collapse of the system. In a nutshell, I think that could be the impact of a failure of reaching an agreement, JCPOA. If, however, JCPOA is revived and accepted, what would the repercussions of that be? For one would assume that perhaps to a degree justifiably, that the possibility of an attack by Israelis on Iranian nuclear sites and perhaps other installations would be enhanced, because they've already repeatedly said that they will not be bound by any agreement reached, and they will do whatever that is required as they see fit to make sure Iran does not go nuclear. And this was repeated only yesterday, the day before, by Netanyahu to Blinken, the US Secretary of State. The other impact is that there will be a lifeline of cash, injection of cash for Iran, which now desperately needs if there is an agreement. Now, I'm not sure how much that will be. When it happened in 2015, reports say some nearly $150 billion went to Iran. Now, how much this time it will go, I don't know, but it will be vital to the preservation of the system and order in Iran. However, we have to bear in mind, even if JCPOA is agreed, that does not affect sanctions that have been imposed on Iran for other things, such as, they say, human rights violation, terrorism, and other things. They will still be in place. And with those sanctions being in place, companies and countries may feel kind of unwilling or uncertain about trading with Iran because, okay, certain sanctions have been lifted, you deal with Iran, but if in the process of this trade with Iran, you violate some of the other sanctions, and then you get fined by the US Secretary, by US Treasury. So countries and companies will be very careful about that. And let's not forget that Iran has lost a lot of its oil customers in the past year or two. And oil requires refinement when you import it. And all those refineries in importing countries have now been adjusted for oil, which comes from, I don't know, Saudi Arabia or other countries that have replaced Iran as exporters. Buying oil back from Iran again would require those countries to readjust their refineries again back to the requirements of the Iranian oil, Iranian crude oil. These are, they don't happen instantaneously. They take time, not that long, but they take time and they cost. But more important than that, countries will think, okay, what if now we start buying Iranian oil and down the line in 3 years, we have maybe a Republican government in the White House and they pull out of JCPOA and then we cannot buy oil again. What then? We have to keep readjusting our refineries. That will be a point, a hindrance for trading with Iran. There is also on the other side, Iranians themselves are wary, the Iranian negotiators are wary of coming to an agreement with the Biden administration on 2 counts. One is that they know that if any of these agreements would have to go through the Senate, it may encounter some opposition even from Democrats. Remember, the Senate is 50-50 now in Washington. And it may not go through. Then it will have to be vetoed by US president, and then going back, in which case then it will have to have 2/3 for rejecting it, which probably Democrats will have, the Biden administration will have its way. It'll be a lengthy process, but it may not have to go to the Senate at all, in which case there's none of that to worry about. However, they're also thinking, what if there is a change of government in 2023 and we have a Republican and then they want to flout the agreement, and then, so they are also concerned about those changes. Let me move on quickly before I end to the impact of these clashes that the US, that Israelis and the Palestinians have had in Gaza. The United States again supported Israel, albeit with diminished enthusiasm. It did say that Israel has a right of self-defense, but it wasn't the kind of support you would probably get from die-hard Israeli supporters presidents like maybe President Trump or others. Let me tell you this, that when these things happen, these clashes happen, well, they don't directly affect the outcome of the negotiations on JCPOA. because Iran desperately wants an agreement, and also the current US administration wants an agreement. And they're not going to allow negotiations be derailed because of the clashes between Israelis and Palestinians. However, when Hamas leaders come openly on international network and say that all their finances and military weaponry all comes from Iran, and they thank Iranian Islamic Republic of Iran for that, that make it rather disquieting for Washington to release money to Iran, because down the line, if there's another clash, then the administration will come under attack that, well, you came into agreement with Iran, you release some more money to them, and see what happened. They gave more money to Hamas, and then we have. So that is something that they are concerned with. And let's not forget that as a result of this clashes, I know we've had some social media and some support for the Palestinians from various corners, but overall, if you look at the official stand of governments, Hamas has now been added to the list of terrorist organizations in Latin America. I think Austria added the entirety of Hamas in a terrorist list. And during the negotiations, they were hoisting the Israeli flag in support of Israel. So the attack on the war that took place, and these rockets that were going to Israel, and of course, the very disproportionate response of Israelis, I mean, that took place, in the end, we cannot say that it worked for Hamas in terms of international image. It have been signs that it has worked both ways. Officially, stance taken by government has gone against them. So I'll just end with that these conflicts, they will not attack the JCPOA directly in the immediate term, but inevitably they contain elements that will have repercussions on the midterm to long-term future of agreements between Iran and the United States. And on that, I end. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your valuable views. Now we will move to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Lieutenant General retired Abdul QAYYUM. Lieutenant General retired Abdul QAYYUM, former Senator Hilal Imtiaz, military retired, is ex-chairman of Senate Standing Committee on Defense Production. The general is a war veteran of 1971 Indo-Pak War and a renowned political defense analyst. He has been member of faculty of National Defense College, now a university, military secretary with 2 prime ministers and chairman of country's 2 largest industrial complexes, Pakistan Ordnance Factories and Pakistan Steel. As a parliamentarian, he remained chairman of Pakistan, Iran, and member of Pakistan-America Parliamentary Friendship Group. He holds a MSc degree from Qaid-e-Azam University and is author of 5 books. With this, over to you, sir. Sir, can you unmute your...
Is that okay now? Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm so grateful that your institution has invited me to say a few words, my humble input on this very important subject in this webinar. You were kind to invite me earlier also. I would say that the the precise point that we want to discuss is that this joint comprehensive plan of action, what was its usefulness, and if it is not revived, what would be its implications? Just briefly, I would like to say that Iran is a very important country of the region. Iran, a country of over 81 million people, has a strong army and is rich in oil and gas resources. Iran at one time was actually the main strength of the United States of America in this region when Shahenshah Raza Shah Pahlavi was there. And I am sure you'll be surprised to know that it was America which supplied them the first atomic reactor in 1957. And in 1964, again, then they gave them the technology for enrichment of uranium and all that. So therefore, they were hand in glove. And Iran, being very important country of the region, it was thought that they can bring in stability in the region if they with the friendship of the Americans and so on. Guardian newspaper had once written that Iran is regionally too important, militarily too formidable, as a trade partner too precious, culturally too rich and valuable to be left to Trump and his know-nothing White House staff. This was Guardian. And we, since we are neighbors here in Pakistan, we understand that Iran is undoubtedly very, very important for the region. Therefore, I feel that this step that Obama government had taken in 2015 for signing this agreement, the joint comprehensive agreement with the P5 countries plus one plus European Union plus Iran. And on that account, then most of the sanctions were lifted. Most of the money that was frozen was unfrozen, assets were unfrozen, and that was a very good move. But unfortunately, somehow, then in 2019, when Trump took certain serious actions, he unilaterally said that we're out of this. Although I believe that European Union wanted this to continue. So therefore, I feel that this is a very good gesture by the Biden administration. I think it's a very wise step that they wanted to revisit it and maybe revive it. And it is, I think, best opportunity for the Iranians too, to capitalize on this opportunity. And now there will be new elections, and Ibrahim Raisi may become the president of Iran after a few months. I think the new leadership must also understand that they must have the working relationship with at least United States of America, if not intimate relationship. The tables turned in 1979 when Imam Khomeini's revolution came in. And thereafter, since 1980, there are no even diplomatic relations between Iran and United States of America, and it is Pakistan which is looking after their interests there. So therefore, I feel that Iran must abide by all the international laws on non-proliferation. But at the same time, the world must also ensure that these sanctions and this non-proliferation international laws should not be applicable only to one country. They should be applicable to all countries which are developing nuclear Israel is a de facto nuclear power, but they have a free hand. And my brother was also talking about what happened in Palestine. There is no, it's not a conflict, it's not a war, because one side is absolutely without arms, and they are the civilian people, and Hamas is their elected government, which was elected in 2006. And the trouble did not start with the missiles. Trouble started with the Iranian, with the Israeli aggression into that area, and time and again violating their sanctity and getting into them and killing them. And that is how it went on and on. So therefore, while we accept United Nations, its charter and resolution, and we ensure its selective application, maybe on Afghanistan or Iraq under false pretext of weapons of mass destruction and so on, we don't do that with Israel. So we don't say that Israelis don't have the right for self-defense. They have the right. They must. And but the West, and including America, is giving two-state solution. The Israelis must listen to that. So that is what I want to say. So in case, my recommendations then in that case would be that Iran, being a very strong country in the region with about $20 billion of their defense budget, they have the defense production facilities of missiles, of submarines, of tanks and guns and so on. They have fought a war with Iraq, a very prolonged war. They have sustained it, and they are a very resilient nation. But now when you put sanctions on them and they don't allow their oil to go out, and you starve them, and you make sure that this country is singled out and diplomatically isolated, and even in the COVID pandemic, you put further sanctions and don't even allow the medicines to go in for the children and those people who are sick people, then I think this is one-sided. I hope and pray that the new leadership in the United States of America, in Joe Biden and his team, would realize that we have United Nations. It has its charter, which ensures the sovereignty and independence of every nation, and we must respect that. And we must give respect, big or small countries. All those members of the United Nations all have their sovereign rights. You can't just ingress into them. And you know what happened to their military commanders in Iraq. There were strikes, and they were, some of them, you see, the commanders were assassinated. No, this is not on. You need to have laws which should be applicable to all. So therefore, I would like to recommend, number one, that Joe Biden government, this indication to revive Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is a very good move, and it is highly appreciated. It must be appreciated by all. Number two, we hope that new leadership in Iran will, as I said earlier, will capitalize on this opportunity and leave the hard line, take that line of rapprochement and use interaction with the Western world, with the European Union, and try to sort of get this solved. Then I have already said that while Iran must abide by the international laws on nuclear non-proliferation, these laws must also be applicable to other countries too. Number four, I would say that Iran must also engage with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in Middle East, with the Muslim Ummah countries and all that, and resolve their differences on Yemen and so on, so that you move hand in glove together and there is no tension. You see what is happening in Syria, in Yemen. Many people, innocent people, are being killed. I think in this 21st century, the world conscious must wake up, and we should not allow this type of atrocities to be committed. You know, in our region in South Asia, what is happening in Kashmir by the Indian leadership. Everybody knows that they are under double lockdown. One is pandemic and one is Moody's lockdown. And there again was killing, about over 100,000 people have been killed and they are asking for right of self-determination, which has been sanctioned to them under the United Nations, and there are resolutions. So selective application of those resolutions should not be. And then we will appeal to the Western world, especially the United States of America, to lift those sanctions from the Iranians, allow them all those rights that the United Nations Charter allows them. You see, when you put restrictions, what happens? For example, we have a contract with Iran on Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline. We are energy-starved country, but we can't do that because there are sanctions. They say if you sign a contract with them, you will come under sanctions. And similarly, India was importing oil, China, Japan, and so on. And they were all given an ultimatum that, okay, by this date, you should not do it. If you do it, then there will be sanctions on them. I think this type of arrangement will not work. We thought that League of Nations did not work when after First World War it was constituted, and the Second World War took place because League of Nations was ineffective. Now, after the Second World War, if we have been able to make this institution of United Nations, I think unless we respect their resolution and charter, and unless we have an effective application across the board, I think our issues will not be. The international conflicts will not be resolved. World will not have peace, which we need badly. We need to concentrate on welfare of human beings, on their education, on their healthcare. And there is so much to do in the third world, very poor countries, and even countries which are a little better off, they also have slums and they need them. So I think that this Iran issue is important. This is one of the flashpoints. This needs to be resolved. And presently that I identify 4 flashpoints in the world. Number 1 is Eurasia, where I think we need to have a rapprochement, Russia, NATO and all. Second is the South China Sea, where you're trying to sort of get forward deployment and closing on and encircling China. Third is Middle East, where is this Palestinian issue. It is a humanitarian issue. And fourth is South Asia, where there is Kashmir dispute. And with that is Afghanistan, and we take pride in that Pakistan is playing a very positive role. And we hope and pray that all regional countries, including China, Russia, and Iran, and Central Asian republics, will play their role to get peace in Afghanistan and allow the Afghan people to solve their own issues. So I think these are all related developments which will take place. So therefore, we strongly recommend that this giant comprehensive plan of action must be revived. Both sides must show flexibility. They should sit together, solve the issues, and Iran must also follow the international law. So with that, I thank you very much. So kind.
Thank you so much, sir, to enlighten us with your thoughts. Now we will move to our last speaker. Our last speaker is Professor Syed Qandil Abbas. Dr. Syed Qandil Abbas did his MSc and PhD in International Relations from University of Tehran, Iran, and presently associated with School of Politics and International Relations, Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad. He is HAC approved PhD supervisor and has also supervised more than 35 MPhil and 2 PhD theses. He has authored various research articles in national and international journals and contributed chapters in several books, national and internationally. He has also presented several research papers and attended workshops on national and international level. Dr. Syed Abbas is member advisory board of Center for Afghanistan, Middle East and Africa, associated with Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad, and he frequently participates in current affairs program of national and international media as a political analyst. With this, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Amna, and respectable speakers, Lieutenant General ABDUL QAYYUM, FARID MIRBAGHERI, Professor, and ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, and very good afternoon. JCPOA is...
I am sorry to interrupt. Could you turn up the volume? Because Is it just me? I can hear you as well. I apologize for.
Okay, JCPOA is going through its fifth stage and fifth round of talks. And for this purpose, I think Iran has fixed 3 months deadline. That was the 21st of May. And that has extended for 1 month. And now it is for 24th of June. So this is the present status of JCPOA. And if we take 24th of June as a next deadline from Iranian side, so we must keep in our mind that 18th of June is the date for Iranian presidential elections. So this whole scenario is providing very important scenarios for future. So about Iranian stance about their nuclear program, historically, I believe that they signed NPT in 1970, and they signed NPT as original signatories. So right from the beginning, I believe that they declared that our nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, and particularly after 1979's Islamic Revolution, Iran declared that Iranian nuclear program will be for peaceful purposes, and these peaceful purposes can be covered under the NPT, because NPT allows signatory countries that they can continue, they can hold nuclear programs for peaceful purposes.
Sir, Qandil, can you please increase your volume?
Let me fix it.
But I can hear everybody very clearly. I don't know if others have problems.
Yeah, we can hear him clearly. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Dr. Qandil, please go ahead, because I mean we can hear you very clearly. I don't know.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. From Iranian side, the stance is that they are signatory of NPT, and their nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, and they want to utilize nuclear technology for agriculture, for medicine, and for energy purposes. On the other hand, United States and Western countries were and are of the view that Iranian nuclear program, which is presently for peaceful purposes, later on can be converted into the military grade nuclear program. So these are two perspectives, but generally we can understand that Western stance of nuclear technology is usually considered as based on double standards, because if it comes to Israel or India, they allow their nuclear programs and they are very easy with their nuclear arsenals. But when Pakistan or Iran are having this program, they are put under imposed sanctions. So as an NPT signatory, Iranian nuclear program remained under the supervision of International Atomic Energy Agency, and they appointed even their inspectors in Iran, and they fixed cameras to supervise their nuclear program. So despite all these measures, United States was not agree with the Iranian nuclear program, and on the other hand, IAEA never endorsed United States claim and blame for having military grade program from Iranian side. So this is the whole scenario. Now, if we take 18th of June as a new presidential elections date, We know that the speculations are in favor of hardliners, and most probably next Iranian president is coming from hardliner political fractions, especially because of failure of JCPOA, because Iranian whole program and whole foreign policy and whole domestic policy were focused on JCPOA, and unilateral withdrew of Donald Trump from this JCPOA. In fact, supported stands presented by Iranian hardliners. That is why in next election, most probably hardliners are coming into power, and Ibrahim Raisi will be the next president. And Ibrahim Raisi is the individual who was also a candidate in 2017 election, and during his election campaign he was focused on opposing Rouhani's weak stance towards Iranian nuclear program and in JCPOA deal. So if he's coming into power, we know that he will have harder stance towards nuclear program. So definitely in case of Ibrahim Raisi, the team of negotiator will also change, and that will create serious problem for smooth dialogue process presently going on in Austria. So now Iranian stance is that we have a strong alternative, that is Chinese investment, which is more than $400 billion. That is a huge amount, and that is in fact based on comprehensive strategic partnership for 25 years. So in case United States is not reviving, for example, JCPOA, and Iran remain under sanctions, comparatively they will have easier mode because of Chinese investment in Iran, because that is based on development of infrastructure in Iran. So that will facilitate Iran. On the other hand, if we keep present situation in Middle East, especially in Palestine, so we know that in pre-1979 period, Iran was having diplomatic relations with Israel, and after 1979, Iran not only cut off its diplomatic relations with Israel, but had two type of stances. First one is based on their ideological stance, and that is focused on Holy Aqsa Mosque. And on the other hand, their political stance is based on their anti-imperialist and anti-US stance, and they don't want to bear Israel as an American policeman in the region. So keeping in view their early foreign policy, which is based on neither East nor West, they refuse to accept UN Security Council resolution that declaring going back to 1967 status about Israel, and they declared that we must have two-state solution. Iran not accepted this, and they demanded that the whole situation must go back to the 1948 situation. So right from the beginning, Israel is also opposing JCPOA, and Israeli leadership was very happy with Trump, and they even put under pressure United States that they should withdraw from this deal. So present aggression against Palestinian, Zionist aggression against Palestinian is, I believe, was aimed on to create mess in the region, and this mess was in the wake of US President Joe Biden's quest for a revival of JCPOA, which is not compatible with Israeli regional plans. So they are opposing revival of JCPOA. So that is why they have started aggression against Palestinian, and mess is created in the region. Despite Iranian active support for Palestinian and even providing military weapons to Hamas and Islamic Jihad, in recent Israeli aggression against Palestinian, I believe Iranian stance was a bit isolated, and they just remained a moral supporter of Palestinian, and they avoided to create the situation like Syria, because they practically went to Syria, but they avoided in case of Gaza or even West Bank, and their main purpose was to smoothness of their dialogue with the United States and Western countries. Similarly, they also show their positive response towards Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's request for normalization with Iran. And we know that in April, they had 2 secret meetings with the KSA in Baghdad, and they have good starts for normalization. So I believe that from Iranian side, we have a lot of positive steps, and they want to revive on the one hand JCPOA, and on the other hand, they want to normalize situation in the Middle East. But on the other hand, if hardliners are coming into power, and United States is not maturing their deal with Iran, and they are not going to revive Iranian JCPOA plan, we know that the whole scenario is under the control of Iranian supreme leader, and Iranian supreme leader will never allow any amendment in JCPOA, and they believe that JCPOA was the international agreement, and that was covered by United Nations Security Council 2231 resolution, and that guarantee must be respected. So Iranian demand is the whole JCPOA must be revived, and all the sanctions at once must be lifted. And then Iran announced that they will roll back their nuclear program. Otherwise, I believe that if United States is not taking it serious, that will allow hardliners of Iran to continue their nuclear program, and even to reciprocate their nuclear program vis-a-vis Israel, because they are having nuclear weapons. So they are considering that if Israel is having nuclear weapon in this region, Iran must have. So based on this, now the time is very short for Americans, and ball is in American and Western courts when Iran is showing its intention and flexible mode to accept Western and American conditions for JCPOA. I believe that Iran must be included in mainstream regional and international politics for smoothness of regional and international politics, and that will be very beneficial both for Iran region as well as for Pakistan, because Pakistan is also having direct influence from all these scenarios. Particularly when we are involved in Afghanistan, and we are involved in Indian aggressive regional designs. So we need Iranian support in this regard, and we have very good historical relations with Iran. So now I believe that it is responsibility of international community leaders to resolve the problem of JCPOA in very positive and smooth manners. I thank you very much. I am ready to answer if there are some questions.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable views. This has really given us a chance to understand the issue from multiple dimensions. Now I hand over the floor to Mr. Imran Sardar for question answer sessions and concluding remarks. Over to you, sir.
Assalamu alaikum. Since there is an internet connectivity problem, So, yeah. So I'm using my colleague's link. So before I go for a question answer session, I can see Dr. Samina Yasmin is here. Dr. Samina Yasmin, welcome. Would you please like to comment on the recent discussion?
Well, thank you very much for asking me. I've just been enjoying, and the question that I have was already answered by Professor Kandil. Really what I was interested in was looking at how China-Iran relationship and the comprehensive strategic partnership is going to shape the future of JCPOA. So I think if that's okay, I'd just learn from everyone else and just enjoy the learning exercise. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I request now anyone asked verbally, or he can paste a question in the chat panel. So there is a question in the chat panel from Bilal. Sir Kandil, is Iran going to accept the two-state solution for the sake of JCPOA's success and give up on its political stance of anti-imperialism? So over to you, Dr. Kandil Abbas.
Presently, Iran is not ready to accept two-state solution because the Iranian traditional stance is based on rejection of Israel, because Imam Khomeini declared that Israel is just like a cancer tumor, and that cancer tumor must be abolished. So that is the traditional stance. But I believe that from Iranian scholars, we have view that Iran is ready to accept at least going back to 1967 position. But I don't believe that Israel is ready to go back to 1967, because after 1967, Israel occupied a lot of lands, Palestinian people, and a lot of lands of neighboring countries, as well as acquired Golan Heights, Syria, a lot of lands of Jordan, Egypt, other neighboring countries. So now it is impossible for Israel to accept going back to 1967. So that is why Iranians are standing on their traditional view that Israel must be abolished, and their solution is about Palestine. Their solution is based on returning back all the Zionists, those who came from different countries to Palestine, and coming back of all the Palestinians who are pushed out from Palestine. And they believe that based on democratic elections, if some Jews are native, they can participate in those elections. And as we know that 5 to 10% Jews were present in Israel from 1917 to 1948. But in 1948, that number increased to 400,000 people, because this number was only 25,000 people in 1917. But in 1948, this number increased to 400,000 people. So now the solution coming from Iranian side is that all those Jews and Zionists who came from outside to Palestine, they must go back, and all the Palestinians who migrated from Palestine to different countries, they must come back, and then based on democratic elections, Christians, Muslims, Jews, all of them must design and establish their government in Palestine.
Thank you very much. We have another question, and that question is from Aisha Zahid. And any panelist can respond to this question, since Aisha Zahid did not mention specifically whom she wants to ask a question. So the question is, there have been speculations that once Iran comes back to the deal, US will start new negotiation to alter the terms of deal, and Iran is adamant on that. How can we see the fifth round as successful in this regard? And should Iran be coming back to this deal, while we are having doubts about US attitude, it may too slap the sanctions again. So this is, I think it's a very important question, and since the fifth round is going on, so any panelist can respond to this question. So first of all, I will request Dr. Qandil Abbas, if you please would like to respond to this question.
Okay, thank you very much. This is very good question. Actually, there are different views about JCPOA, and the main reason behind Donald Trump's opposition to JCPOA was based on the speculation that Iranian missile program and other military programs are not covered in JCPOA, and demanded that we also want to keep under our inspection supervision of the Iranian military activity, and that is considered as against sovereignty of Iran by Iranian leadership, and they declared that under the JCPOA was decided and agreed that all the near activities of Iran would be under the supervision, and Iran is ready to put all activity under the supervision of international agency, IAEA, refused to give access to the inspectors or American or any other country to their secret and military bases, and military activities should not be exposed according to Iranian, because if they want to have such demands, they can start discussion and dialogue with Iran, but after complete revival of JCPOA. And another problem of American and Western side was that Iran is supporting Islamic groups in the Middle East. So they believe that Iran must guarantee they will not support those groups. So again, Iranian side is of the view that Iran is supporting anti-imperialist perspective all over the world, and they will continue propagating anti-imperialist perspective that is not based on extremism, and that is not based on fundamentalism. This is Iranian perspective. I believe that the whole, both hardliner and moderate Iranian leadership is ready to rejoin JCPOA, but they will not be agreed on any amendment or any inclusion of any other thing in this agreement.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant General QAYYUM Sahab. If you please respond to that question, would you like to?
I think very, very elaborately this has been explained. What I feel is that JCPOA is important. Its revival is essential for both America and for also Iranians. But this will only be revived if both parties agree. And we hope and pray that in that the pivotal role that can be played is by the United States of America. They must realize that they can't single out one country, which has already suffered very badly. And therefore, they have to see that the yardstick for doing justice globally has to be for all the countries. It has to be equal. If you have your blue eyes people, and on one side you give them favors, and on the other side you want to victimize the other country, I think that won't work. Israel came into this region. They were evicted. You know, in the Roman Empire, there were 3 mutinies that they did. And in that, they lost so many Jews in that area, and they were evicted. But they came back with a claim that they were here 2,000 years ago. And I think this Balfour Declaration in 1917, the British allowed them, and that is how the problem started. The British did that in Pakistan, India division, and they kept Kashmir just in the doldrum, and today we are suffering. So both these problems they are part of the problems, and they should also be part of the solution also. But don't forget that even now, the American leadership, even from their own ruling party, the Sandy and all that, they are saying that the problem has been initiated by the Israelis. And lastly, I would like to say that Benjamin Franklin was the United States founding father. He was known as the man of the millennium. He had drafted that independence resolution for the United States of America. He had said that the Jews must not be given any protection in the American Constitution, and they should not be allowed to really get hold of all our departments and all our key posts. If that happens, then our children and their children will never forgive us. So that was the advice he had given. Now today, I think Israel must also realize that if in 1967, they occupied the Golan Heights, they went to Western Bank in Jordan, and they occupied most of the places, they will have to vacate that and have then two states solution is applicable. They have the right to exist. But then in Pakistan, I was reading Allama Iqbal had once said that if the Jews think that 2000 years ago they were in the Middle East, so therefore they have the right to come back and settle there. The Muslims were in Spain and Marrakesh for 800 years, from 88th century to about 15th century. Do we have the claim to say that, okay, we can come back and settle there and make a colony independently? I think that is history. We have to now see and coexist peacefully. So therefore, I think this is a very serious situation in that area. Iranians must be engaged and they must be satisfied. And this revival of this agreement must be done smoothly. And in that, the pivotal role that can be played is by the United States of America.
Thank you, Janasab. Now I move to the third panelist, Dr. Farid. Would you like to please respond to that question that Aisha Zahid has just raised?
Yes, I very much would like to respond to that. In 2003, when US invaded Iraq and occupied Iraq, toppled Saddam, Iranians got so worried, they proposed something that was known as Grand Deal to President George Bush. In that deal, they offered to recognize Israel, to stop supporting militant organizations, and to stop all nuclear activity unilaterally, only in return for a guarantee from the US that they will not invade Iran. That deal was taken by the Swiss ambassador to Washington. It was rejected. And later the Swiss ambassador was actually, I think, reprehended by his own government for having done so. Yes, Iranian government will accept the two-state solution if it sees it in its own interests. The anti-imperialism is only to a point, and depending how we, of course, we define anti-imperialism. I mean, the Chinese are killing many Muslims in China, but Iran is rather quiet about it. The Russians are killing many Muslims in Chechnya, but Iranians are quiet about it. So that means that they are selective in where they want to be kind of anti-imperialist. And if they see fit that it fits their interests, yes, they will accept a two-state solution. My other point was that about China, yes, you're absolutely right. The last speaker, doctor, he said, it is very, very important. It will change the geopolitical landscape if it goes through, because theoretically it has to go through parliament and parliament has to approve. But right now, parliament is really a lame duck. It hasn't got much say. It has to rubber stamp whatever is coming from higher authorities to it. But Iranian political situation is very volatile. We don't know. It is perceived. It just reminds me that when the Soviet troops left Iran. They had occupied northern Iran in the Second World War, and they wouldn't leave. At the time, the Iranian Prime Minister Qavam promised Stalin that he would give all the concessions for oil in Caspian Sea exploration. And on that, and also letter from President Truman, Stalin withdrew Soviet troops. But then the Prime Minister, Iranian Prime, engineered a no vote in parliament against giving such concessions to the Soviet Union. And the parliament rejected it. And Stalin was furious, but then it was too late. He said, sorry. So it is conceivable that this deal that has been signed, but it hasn't gone through parliament, it may yet be defeated. It is not particularly popular amongst Iranian people either. So we just have to wait and see. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Aisha Zahid, I come to you a little bit later as there is one hand raised who wants to ask a question verbally. So Mustafa Kamal, would you like to ask a question?
Assalamu alaikum ji. I'm Mustafa Malik from the Center for Research and Security Studies. First of all, I congratulate IRS for convening such an important discussion. I have a question for Dr. Qandil. I would rather say a learning opportunity. So, sir, do you not think that Iran is creating a paradox in their international relations by being practical in terms of supporting Syria and just sympathetic when it comes to supporting Palestinians, where the ideology of Islamic revolution clearly dictates that Iran should be supporting Muslims, around the world who are being oppressed. And secondly, you referred to instances of, Islamic ideology and then political ideology of Iran in their international relations. Can both these ideologies coexist in international relations? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mustafa. Actually, Iranian defense policy is based on defending the Iranian land out of their borders. So they know that if they want to confront with those forces and those countries who are opposing Iran, Iran should reach to them. So that is why the major regional threat for Iran is Israel, and Iran is trying to have its presence in the neighborhood of Israel. So that is why I believe that on the one hand, Iran is supporting Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Palestine, and on the other hand, they have physical presence in Syria. So their presence in Syria is in fact considered as legal presence by international law, because that is based on their agreement with Bashar Assad, president of Syria, and they believe that their role is advisory role for Syrian military. On the other hand, their provision of weapon to Islamic Jihad and Hamas is also based on their bilateral agreement with these legal entities in Palestine. So this is Iranian perspective. But on the other hand, from regional countries, we know that when it comes to Iran, all the Arab states as well as United States and Western countries right from the beginning started to isolate Iran, and they imposed a lot of sanctions against Iran. But after 4 decades, now if we want to evaluate or assess what happened during these 40 years, all the countries were trying to isolate Iran, but on the other hand, Iran extended its influence not only in the region, even out of this region, and they reached to even Africa and Europe as well. And they have very strongholds in these different regions. So I believe that the major issue behind this whole scenario was the attempts coming from Western and Arab countries to isolate Iran. And Iran have not been part of regional and international mainstream politics. That is why Iran retaliated in this way. So presently, when we are assessing that if United States revive JCPOA and Iran is included into mainstream regional and international politics, I believe that Iran will change its policy towards supporting different groups or its influence in the region, because Iran will be bound to respect regional settlements and international settlements. But now it is up to regional and international players that they are bringing Iran into mainstream regional and international politics, or they still want to face Iranian influence in the region as well as on international levels.
Thank you very much. Now we'll give floor to the Aisha Syed. Would you please briefly respond to your questions, or whatever the speakers has responded to your question. Then I'll go to other questions. Please, Aisha Syed, if you'd like to respond. Okay, we go to some other questions. There are 3-4 questions from a single participant. He did not mention his name. The one question is how long it will take. I think it's not a 2+2 game, that nobody is certain about it. Window of opportunity, as the conservative will handle the JCPOA. I think partly Dr. Qandil has responded to that question. And I will take its fourth question, which is, I think it's very important. How Iran sees its security concerns regarding Israel's specification after revival of JCPOA, as Israel is against it. I think Dr. Qandil, Abbas, you partly mentioned in your presentation. Would you like to respond first to this question? The security concerns of Israel.
Yeah. From Iranian side, it was demanded regularly that if they want to stop Iranian nuclear program, they are ready to accept nuclear-free Middle East. They demanded that the whole region must be nuclear-free, and for this purpose, Israel's nuclear program must be rolled back and then capped. That must be under supervision. So Iran is ready to accept that they will leave their nuclear program, but it must be guaranteed that in the Middle East, at least no country will follow nuclear program. But on the other hand, when it comes to politically a position of Iran towards Israel, as I told you, that that is based on a competition between Iran and Saudi Arabia for leadership of the Muslim world. And both the countries are trying to declare that they are leaders of the Muslim world. And based on that, Iran is claiming that they want to fight for freedom of their first Qibla. And the Al-Aqsa Mosque is having very holy status for Muslims. But they believe that its holy status for Christian and Jews is also acceptable, but it should not be denied that Muslims must leave Al-Aqsa Mosque. That is, I believe, ideological and religious issue, and that can be resolved by giving specific time to different religious groups to have access to Al-Aqsa Mosque, and Al-Aqsa Mosque can become a factor for unity instead of a factor for disunity.
Thank you very much. I think it's an important question. Any panelist, Lieutenant General QAYYUM sir, would you like to please respond to the Israeli security concerns, whether JCPOA is revived or not? What kind of threats that Iran is facing from Israel, and what vice versa?
Sorry, who are you addressing the question to?
And Lieutenant General QAYYUM sir, would you like to respond? And then I come to you, Dr. Farid. I think General Sahab is not responding. Dr. Farid, would you like to please respond to the Israeli security concerns?
Yes, actually, I was looking for General, and I don't know why he left. Yes, Israeli security concerns are that if Iran is allowed to go nuclear down the line, then Israel and then other Arab countries will go nuclear as well. Sooner or later, then we have a nuclear parity of sorts in the region, and Israel would lose its strategic advantage. I think Iranians should never seek nuclear weapons because Iran has a strategic advantage when it comes to conventional weaponry, its size, its population, and all that. And therefore, arrival of nuclear weapons will erode some of that conventional superiority and bring about a nuclear parity. So that's Israeli concern. Iranian concern is that, yes, Israel may attack. Israel has been, well, I have to admit, fantastically successful in infiltrating Iranian nuclear sites, repeatedly sabotaging them. Only past few days, again, several huge explosions. We had Natanz. We had 500 kilogram of the most secret confidential Iranian nuclear documents stolen from Iran and taken to Israel. I mean, this shows huge infiltration. And the Iranian government, although they are good in intelligence, they have proven terribly poor in counterintelligence. They have not been able to do anything to stop all this. They are worried about Israelis responding. Israelis will, I think, if push comes to shove, if they see the only way to stop Iranian going nuclear is to stage an attack on Iran, I think they will do it. But they will have to accept the risk, which probably they will evaluate. And that is, if the war is prolonged, there is a risk of the rapprochement and the Abraham agreement they have with some Arab countries being put at risk because of public opinion demanding a tougher stance against Israel. But if it's going to be a short and swift attack against Iran, and then it will probably have the blessing of Saudi Arabia and others. It will actually damage substantially Iranian nuclear positions. It's a threat that looms over, let me just, over the region, a war. Hassan Haikal, the very internationally renowned Egyptian journalist, passed away. He predicted before he passed away that the next war that is going to rock and shake the region will be between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So I think security concerns are there.
Thank you very much. My apologies to Nihal Kazim. I think he has raised a question that is, I think, a little bit out of context. That is why I just, because as we are just discussing about the prospects of the JCPOA and what would be the outcome of the nuclear talks, and your question is a little bit out of the context. So I just want to ask a question from Dr. QANDIL Abbas. Sir, do you think the recent Iran-Saudi talks, the context, have any kind of impact on the nuclear talks? As I mean, the shuttle diplomacy that European Union is doing, the kind of this Saudi is also doing this, is going to do the same thing that the EU is doing. So, does it have any impact on the nuclear negotiations?
Thank you. About KSA-Iran talks, there are two perspectives, two opposite perspectives. First perspective is based on Joe Biden's threats to MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, because when Joe Biden came into power, he announced that they will have their own stance about Khashoggi's case, because they believe that the American investigation is of the view that Mohammed bin Salman is directly involved in Khashoggi's murder. So because of that, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is feeling that they must have positive response on regional level to counter American pressure. So when MBS is facing American and Western pressures about Khashoggi case, and especially about despotic attitude on regional level. So he is having, on the one hand, good relations with, he want to have good relations with Iran. On the other hand, they also started normalization with Turkey, and even they started dialogue with Bashar Assad. So that is attempts from KSA. So on the other hand, the second perspective is based on the perception that Joe Biden and United States has given green signal to Arab states to have good relations with Iran and to normalize situation in the Middle East, because America don't want to continue instability in the Middle East for economic purposes. So these are two perspectives. My perception is that the experience of last 40 years, in fact, taught all the regional and international powers that confrontation with Iran will not have positive results for them, because during last 40 years, they tried to be focused on regime change in Iran. They failed. They tried to isolate Iran. They failed. They tried to weaken Iran economically. Again, they failed. Presently, Iran is surviving. They have good relations with China and Russia, and they have very good influence in Bahrain, in Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon, and all other countries. So that I believe that the lesson of last 40 years is that Iran must be included in mainstream regional politics, as well as regional agreements on regional and international levels. This is my perspective.
Thank you very much. Is there any person wants to ask a question? The floor is still open. If not, then I conclude. May I conclude, Amna Nisar?
Yeah, there was a question. I read earlier in the chat that there is a talk of the US going back to JCPOA with changes to the agreement once this basic agreement is revived. And then what happens? That was in the beginning of the chat. I think somebody asked. Okay. I think there is that talk, but well, Israelis are not taking it seriously. They don't believe this is a serious thing, that the JCA will be amended. People don't think Iranians will easily, and the Iranians are good negotiators. I mean, somebody said they're gold medallions in negotiating. They will not easily give way to changes being made once they get these sanctions removed. So yes, there is that thing that I think it is said more by Biden administration to placate some of the Democrats who've taken a stand against it.
Thank you, Dr. Farid, and my apologies for not taking this question. So I think we are approaching to the end of this session, and in the end, I agree what Dr. Farid said, that there is a strong desire on both sides, on the United States and Iran, to have some kind of resolution, if not the complete resolution, but at least some kind of resolution. But the path is rocky. And Lieutenant General has raised a very important suggestion for Iran, that Iran should have working relationship with the United States, regardless of the outcomes of JCPOA, and also suggested that Iran to have to maintain its relations with Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and all the Middle Eastern countries and all the Muslim countries. And I agree with General Saab that isolating Iran would not serve the purpose of either parties. And what Dr. Qandil Abbas has said, as we have yet to see what you said, sir, there are chances that the hardliner leader will come up in Iran, and which can complicate the negotiations. So in the end, I would again stress the need to de-link the JCPOA from any kind of frictions, whether the difficult any kind of frictions, as the difficult issues are yet to discuss. It also true that both Iran and the US are facing domestic political constraints to deal with each other, since few political factions in the United States disagree on the sanction relief. And some elements within the Iran favor the country never compromise on its nuclear program at its faces. So the path is rocky, but the solution, I think, lies in between. And there is a need to grasp what is going on between the lines. And I think EU role is very important. With this, I hand over the floor to Amna Nisar Abbasi to please formally thanks all the participants and the panelists. Over to you, Amna.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Have a wonderful evening. Allah Hafiz.